So I titled this section Exploring with More, but actually I loved a phrase that Matt Dixon brought up this morning called rational drowning. We're going to do a little bit of that today. We've been busy in the past year. Those of you that joined us here at AVEC last year, that was my first opportunity to speak in front of you and share some of our market intelligence efforts. I was about 6 weeks on the job at that point. A bit of an audition feel on my part, but certainly a great opportunity to share what we had learned from our market intelligence at that point. We've done a lot more in the last year, one of those being MORE, and I'll talk about that acronym in a moment. But the idea is we've got a ton of research that we wanted to distill down to highlight some of these opportunities that are coming through in these vertical markets, the ones that you just got asked about. It's a bit drinking from the fire hose. I've violated even some of my own rules in putting this deck together to go broad, to show you lots of different data, knowing that you're going to get access to this deck afterwards. I'd love to have conversations with you about it. You certainly can put in your questions into the app, and we'll be able to deal with those too. We're hoping to have a little bit of question at the end of a little time for questions at the end of my presentation today. If time allows, we'll have Dave come back up. We'll pull from some of the questions that you put into the app to go through and talk about. I'm going to violate another rule that actually Matt brought up today. Don't lead with the 3 slides that he mentioned. 1, vision statement. 2, product assortment. 3, a map. So I'm going to lead with a vision statement, partially because for us it's really important still to talk about why are we here. What is it that we as Avixa are hoping to provide to you guys, and what are we hoping to educate you for? As we talked about, the rational drowning, this ability to lead with insights, this ability to challenge your customer, to bring new ideas, to bring thought-provoking research into the mix. It was a great priming the pump for even what we're talking about today. Two things that I pulled out of our mission statement and value and overall purpose and strategic initiatives. One is, of course, being the catalyst for growth. Catalyst for growth, I highlighted that phrase because our research, what we're hoping to do is provide insights that help you uncover, better understand, and capitalize on opportunities that are out there. Part of the way we do that is this statement around market intelligence. And I highlighted 3 key words in here. Become the authoritative source for market intelligence in our industry through data capture, analytics expertise, insight delivery, and creating world-class market research. This is not your garden variety association research, is kind of what we're trying to say to you. We want to be an authoritative source. We want to have well-founded research with great partners like IHS Markit. We want to provide insights that you can then bring into your conversations with your customers, all of that making us world-class. It also comes through in the visual element. So we spend a lot of time on our research offerings trying to make sure, like your exceptional experiences, that that visual element is addressed. The product slide that Matt talked about, this also helps you orient to what are the various tools that we have in our belt that allow us to go after different questions that you might have. That's why this slide talks about exploring those prevalent questions through our research. There's 3 brands that I really want you to kind of get acquainted with. And you'll notice the little icons here. So each one of those, as we go through some of the slides, you're going to see a little icon in the upper right-hand corner. That'll kind of help you reference back. Where can I get more information about this particular topic? So going from left to right, you heard from Andy a bit before about macroeconomic trends. Our meta series that we put out there tackles this fundamental question. What is the outlook for demand for AV products and services, both now and on into the future? What are the contributing metrics that kind of impact it? GDP, construction investment, CapEx, et cetera. That allows us to then tell the story about the industry through IOTA, Industry Outlook Trends and Analysis. And this is, what are those biggest opportunities for growth? How does the macroeconomics create opportunity for us? Where are they? What markets are they in? What products are they? What do they involve? Whether it's audio, video, et cetera. This last series, we're going to spend a lot of time on this today. I have a bunch of data to share and insight from our MORE series. Market Opportunity Analysis Reports. This is how. So we identify all these growth areas And we wanted to better uncover, well, if I wanted to go after transportation, as you just reflected back to us, an area that you'd like to learn more about, or retail, how do I do that? Who are the decision makers? What are the pain points among the true end user, the consumer? How have providers been serving this market so far? Where have their challenges been? To help give you some of that fuel to bring into your conversations. The Meta brand, we actually have two subsets some of you may be aware of, and I'm gonna pull some insights from those as well. Our comp and benefits report, we renamed this year to an employment trends. We wanted to go bigger, broader. We know that unemployment is a key factor. In conversations we hear a lot about issues of finding the right people. So I wanted to highlight some of that. Our business index, if you go to our homepage of ICSA.org, you'll see a little icon down about 3/4 down the way of the page. That's our latest data on the business index, and I'll cover that. So that's just the orientation. So now what we're going to start to do is, with this broad perspective that we just got from macroeconomics, we're going to start to pull it back down to these individual vertical markets and set you guys up for the afternoon. Hopefully you'll get a couple of takeaways that when you go into those panels, you can feel armed and ready to ask great questions of the panelists. So we start with just how you're feeling. We've done pollings here in the audience of kind of things that your word cloud, your things that you're thinking about. We do a survey on a monthly basis to folks like yourselves, those that are in the industry. Some of you in this room may be a part of this panel. We ask two primary things. One is, how are your sales doing versus the month prior? And how is your employment looking versus the month prior? In both cases, we continue to see over the 2 years of this survey strength in both sales and employment. The way you read this, anything above a 50 is good. So we use a methodology called a diffusion index. The shorthand on that is, if it's above 50, the net perspective is that the industry is growing, that my sales, if I'm reflecting as a panelist, my sales are growing versus the month prior. So October was up, especially up year over year. Employment continues to do really well. Unemployment may be a factor here, though we haven't quite seen it yet, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. Does unemployment and the challenge with finding the right people, does that pull down my perspective on employment issues? We'll see in just a moment. Unemployment, Andy talked a little bit about this before, and as we mentioned, it's one of those factors that we continue to look at and continue to talk about with audiences. It's important to restate this fact because it's both a blessing and a curse for our industry. As Andy pointed out, this is an area where it's great if there's more of them employed, there's more disposable income, that translates down into demand for our industry as well. This gives you an idea, though, of just how strong we are globally. Those same areas that are seeing great economic growth, Asia, for example, very, very low rates of unemployment, well below 5, and as Andy pointed out, below 4, 3.7 in the United States. In fact, in the United States, we're seeing one of the highest number of job openings that we've seen over the last 10 years. So this has been a 10-year trend, not a recent one, as some might lead you to believe. This is actually a trend that we've been watching where we're seeing more and more jobs come into the market. What does this mean, though, for us? The curse side or the challenge side is, how do we find the right people? How do we get more people to be CTS? How do we get more people to consider AV as an industry? How do we bring them in? We're seeing a higher demand even for jobs that require college education, technology experience. So the industry, we do this study every single year now on compensation and benefits. As we mentioned, we broaden that to unemployment or to overall employment trends, looking at job postings. What we found is actually the industry has already started to respond in terms of that wage increase. So there's been this big question out there. Actually, are wages improving overall? Are they exceeding inflation? And in our case, we're about two times inflation, a 4% total weighted compensation. So what that means is, even though you might expect us to hire up, we hire more higher-end, higher-level staff, even when you account for all that sort of stuff, we're seeing a net growth, about 4% in wages. But also interesting, I get asked a lot, what's happening with this whole AV/IT convergence? As we all know, it's become harder and harder to really separate out what is an AV solution, what is an IT solution, because the two are often so intertwined. The staff that we're dealing with when we pitch projects, we're often communicating with the IT managers. We're starting to see that reflected more and more in the diversity of skills that integrators are looking for. And this cuts to even how the vertical markets and how we go after those opportunities in the future. So there's a lot on this slide in terms of coloration. But if you look at the yellow, the teal, and the orange, those three positions actually have computer in the title, so a very IT sounding. So computer user support specialist, a computer programmer, computer occupations, all other. This is how in the codes that they'd use to define jobs. This is how things are changing within integration. So we looked at job postings within SEN's top 50 companies to see how that's shaking out. We're seeing that percentage growing through time. So more and more of our integration companies are diversifying their skill sets to be able to bring that in. You can see it was fairly fat in the beginning, say 2012, declined a little bit and is surging back into the marketplace. So we're seeing response out there. The good news overall, consistent with a low unemployment, with a great rate of GDP across the globe, being hard-pressed to really find regions where there is less growth. There are some, certainly, where there's challenges. We know Venezuela, for example, some parts of even Middle East and Africa. The overall story for our industry, consistent with that sales number we heard before from the poll, is that growth abounds. In terms of total addressable market, which is a question we get asked a lot. One of the reasons why people start consuming research is, as a firm, they want to know, how do I stand against the total? How are things looking? How are we progressing as an industry? How large are we? 186 billion, growing to 229 billion. That's 4.3% compound annual growth rate. All sounds really impressive. But really, where the rubber hits the road is when we start to pull that apart. And we ask questions about, well, where is that? What's driving that growth? What vertical markets, what technologies, et cetera? So those are the types of things that we look for when we do this annual update of our IOTA reports. As the icon shows, this is something that you can drill deeper into with that. We get asked, of course, a lot about when is the recession. I think Andy teased up at least the idea that through 2019, we look great, and as an industry, even out to 2023, as this shows, we are continuing to expect to see growth. We will be sharpening our pencils every year as more data comes in to dig into this story a bit more. So we're going to start pulling now closer. As I mentioned, total addressable market in terms of a great, big, expanding industry is fantastic, especially if you're a global company who's looking at how do I capture a bigger part of that pie, as many of our users are. But how does that translate into some of the underlying industries? So we took the 6 that we're highlighting in some of the research we've done: corporate, venues, retail, education, transportation, and hospitality. You'll notice one strange one in this. If you really think about the term vertical market, corporate really kind of spans across. It's more horizontal. So what we tend to mean as an industry, this is office spaces. This is the collaborative work environments. You can have those same things in retail, but what we're really meaning by those others is the same sort of thing. It's what spaces, what environments are those particular industries representing. So the two biggest traditionally in our market, corporate certainly is up there at almost 34% of this top 6, 39 or almost $40 billion in 2018. Venues, which we include sports venues that we'll talk about today, in that mix, about 24%, $28 billion. And this is global figures. As you start to parse down, we start to see more opportunity and how that shapes out in various parts of the world. So let's bring it even closer in then. If those are our TAMs, our total addressable markets, our opportunities for growth, the size of this opportunity for us as providers, integrators, manufacturers, distributors, how do we go after it? One of the first questions that I got in this job is more end user perspective. How do we learn more about what end users want, what technologies they're interested in, what they already know, if they've done their research, what kind of knowledge they have coming into conversations with suppliers. we decided to dig deep. So we created this series more to essentially go into those vertical markets. Started with retail, launched that earlier this year. We've tackled corporate. We have hospitality, transportation. Soon to be published is sports venues and then higher ed. So what I'm going to give you guys today is a taste of this. I should mention that you have summaries for some of these on your app. Feel free to email them to yourselves so that you have it to take with you. These slides also available there, but make sure you email this because you'll want to refer back. What we've put together out of all the data, since we have the data now across these 6 vertical markets, we've put together a summary for you today that kind of digs into some of the key findings. Any one of these slides, as you'll see in a moment, my apologies in advance, it's a lot to digest, and that's on purpose because there is nuance that hopefully our panelists will also help us explore to any one of these vertical markets. What we did is take what the industry is often referring to as user-centric design or design thinking in our approach. What that means is really understanding the value chain, starting with that group of people that our customers, our end users, would call the true end user, the consumer. So we surveyed in each one of these vertical markets, and pay attention to the little icons here too, consumer survey being the single person. We dug deep into finding out, let's say for retail, people who had shopped recently, what was their experience in the store? Did technology play a role? What were their pain points? Those kinds of things we wanted to uncover. What were delighters? What were things that they'd like to see more of? So that you're going to get that same insight across each one of these. Transportation, same sort of thing. How do they navigate through a transportation hub? What information were they looking for? How did technology impact the satisfaction they had with that experience? We add to that what we call the end user perspective. Here we surveyed, let's call them enterprise decision makers within those vertical markets. Used some creative access to sampling that we had. Some of them are Avixa members in the case of higher ed, for example. Others we had to go out and actually look for individuals that were making decisions about AV products and services within their companies. Any exploration wouldn't be complete without also talking to even our insiders. How does that end user experience and in desire, need, requirement, how does that compare to what providers are looking for? Rich data, tons of information here that it would take a while to go through. Certainly plenty of rational drowning to be done within these data sets. So we've put together some summaries, and I'm going to walk you through some of the slides, some of the information that we gathered to hopefully illuminate at least a few key points for you as we look at these and as you go into your panels. So let's kind of just go through these vertical markets real quickly. On the part of corporate, for example, I was very interested in this idea of both remote work and drivers of satisfaction, drivers of productivity, what contributes to that sense of productivity. We did things like correlating to your overall satisfaction, what pops out. And one of the key things we learned here is support from leadership was a pivotal and crucial component to their overall satisfaction. That came into also the process they go about getting tools, technology, and the decisions that they have to make around that. So supporting those and enabling them and providing tools and technology were key drivers of that satisfaction. We also heard this unemployment theme come through too. So while this remote work phenomenon was still out there was also this undercurrent of pulling back employees and building a corporate culture in an office space that allowed them to retain talent. It was a statement of brand, it was a compelling, exceptional experience, and they used that to retain their talent. Venues, sports venues. Satisfaction with technology here was amazingly correlated with their overall experience. We get that, we know it. When we go to a sporting event, and the Jumbotron doesn't work, and we can't see the plays. This happened actually to a DC United game not long ago. The Jumbotron wasn't working. You can't follow along. Your overall enjoyment is impacted, and your decision to whether to return is impacted as well. Retail. Interesting theme here. Very hard to get a consumer to remember what they saw in terms of technology. Not a surprise. But what the undercurrent there was, technology was not the means unto itself. It wasn't the end game. It was a facilitator of the overall experience. So how could they get the information they needed to make that purchase in the end? Education is one of our hottest data sets, hot off the press. So in here, what we tease out from these results is that technology in the classroom, by and large, across the students that we surveyed, really was in need of help. The experiences were lacking. They were wondering, how could that better facilitate the professor to teach us, to improve our ability to learn? And that correlates, of course, with their satisfaction and scores of engagement. Transportation, I mentioned before, access to travel information, waypoints, all that sort of stuff. The biggest pain point for them, as many of us may agree, is audio quality in the hubs, being able to actually hear the announcements. Last but not least, hospitality. Brad Grimes and I had the pleasure of going to a hospitality event, and there was a lot of talk about activation in hospitality, creating that experience that once they come into the hotel, right in the lobby, they're already engaged, they're getting information. That was an undercurrent here too, as well facilitating that positive in-room experience. Key goal of technology implementation, voice is a delighter. So this is, of course, the market where we're starting to really see that interest in voice as a technology. Tons of information on this one. The point of this is to show you, as you look at any one of these given markets, that similar to consumer requirements, the benefits that companies are realizing within these vertical markets is very different. And in some cases, they're very fragmented. So if you look at some of the high points here, for example, in transportation, promoting the company brand as being a key benefit or a purpose behind an investment in AV was top at 81%. But we take a low point in corporate, increased work productivity, actually, I should say, 51% roughly speaking. That doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that there were more answers chosen by different people. So what's the point of that? It's crucial as we think about the conversations that we're having and the insights that we bring, that we do our homework too. So we just learned that our customers, 57% of them have done their research and already down the purchase path. We have to be similarly armed in those conversations and understand what are their benefits, what are their pain points, what are the things they are hoping to address, the metrics that matter to them. So in corporate's case, we see almost as much mention of increased employee satisfaction, this retaining talent, as work productivity. Hospitality, impressing customers. Retail, increasing sales, very fragmented results here too. Education, 82%, easier for the professor to present. So this is that idea we just talked about, where technology in the classroom could be better, and where our students want to see it is more ways of facilitating that, the educator's part to convey their information. We were very interested too in the cutting edge technologies. So among consumers, what would they like to see more of? Not a surprise here that voice starts to really pop. Corporate, hospitality, those two markets in particular, where we know, as we talk to our customers, the conversations that we're having, that increasingly comes up. I'd like to bring Alexa into the boardroom. I'd like to be able to voice control my systems. Hospitality, there's already experiments going on. It's the nearest in and probably most sensical place to put some of that voice control. AR, VR also popping up in several of these lists, education as well as corporate and hospitality. Retail, security surveillance, those kinds of things, consumers being aware that that is part of the retail experience. Audio is another piece that they wanted to see more of. And then as we get into places like big venues, sports venues and transportation, those video walls, interactive displays, video projection, lighting, all that sort of stuff starts to pop into the mix. What we find, though, in terms of what's being invested in, is that a lot of these things, say voice control, AR, VR, those are still not largely invested in. So this question was asked of our enterprise decision makers. What are the areas that you are planning to increase your investment in? And these are the ones that fell to the bottom of the list. Wanted to start with that because it's illustrative of how there's still this new opportunity that's just starting to come into the mix. Just starting to see some interest, some careful exploration of voice-assisted control, AR, VR, etc. Some of these things, though, reflect outgoing. So less investment, for example, in corporate spaces and large venue presentation systems. Not that it doesn't happen, but that was an area our group was saying that they were planning a little bit less investment in the coming year. So what dominates? This is the flip side. Where are they planning to make investments? If not, then what, is what the question asks here. So here we take that same list, forget those at the bottom. These are what came up to the top. Some strong themes, of course, in transportation, retail, digital signage. We're seeing lots of new applications in that. Walking through, even Tampa's airport, where you saw a lot of those great displays, even as you're coming down the escalators into the baggage claim, digital signage. Digital signage also at baggage claim, sharing information about local weather, etc. In corporate, not a surprise here, unified communication solutions popping to the top of the list. We see that even in our own IOTA, our industry sizing data, that this is something many companies are starting to invest in. Hospitality was interesting, perhaps some investments in ancillary technologies, wireless presentation systems, perhaps in those conference centers types of stuff, security, surveillance, showing up on our list as well. Interesting, security surveillance also, perhaps given the world, reflect a bit the world that we live in. Sports venues had this high on their list, more so even than digital signage. One other way to look at this is down at the technology. So as Avixa, the story that we tell now is integrated experience. Solutions drive the market. We're talking less and less about the individual technology ingredients and more about the holistic aspects of it. So we wanted to find out, well, where is there the most planned investment? And you'll see, though there are other categories that we often get the spotlights, the focus of the industry, like video. Those were certainly heavy areas of investment. The way to interpret this, of course, is look for the darker shades, and that's where you're seeing the most planned investment, or the highest percent that we're saying that was an area they wanted to invest. Almost across the board, audio equipment really came up to the top of the list. Capture and production is where we put things like video conferencing. That also was strong in hospitality. So you can start to see where there are these opportunities as you think about your own product sets and what you're bringing to market and the piece of the solution. And being able to say things like, did you know that in transportation hubs, one of the biggest complaints and drivers of satisfaction is poor audio quality? Is that something that you're planning to build into your solutions? Those kinds of questions are important. Same story here. Look for those things where there's the darker color, because what that tells us is there's a gap a bit. So we ask two questions. One, we ask of enterprise decision makers, what technologies are you planning to invest in over the next year, 2 years? This one is, among providers, what are the technologies and skill sets that you're bringing to your customers? And so what we found is those darker areas there's more demand than there is skill set in some cases, and vice versa. So you can look at the offsets here where we see providers underrepresenting in their skill set, potential more areas. And actually, my apologies, the lighter color is here what you want to focus on. So environment, in particular, is an area that we see coming up more and more. Being able to tie in lighting, HVAC, et cetera, all those controls into a holistic solution, less offered by the providers that we survey. Doesn't mean they're not getting it from somewhere. It just means among those that we surveyed, say traditional AV that are part of the Avixa membership, there's potentially some skill gaps. There's others here that you can tease out. This is like Inkblot. Take a moment, look at it, digest it, see what else comes out at you as you take a look. So pulling that back to what does that mean in terms of investment? So these are the kinds of things that you can start to ask or count as baseline for your opportunities. This sizes how much the enterprise decision makers within each of these vertical markets is planning to invest. First, in terms of CapEx, so the larger pink figure, 1.9 for corporate, 19.3 for venues, 1.7 for retail, et cetera. Those are planned capital expenditure investments among those that we surveyed. You can see clearly transportation hubs is a far and away outlier, just reflecting the sheer size and scope of the investments that they're making. Large footprint. In this case, we were interested in airports and rail stations as the primary. The number in the yellow is the percentage of that they're planning to allocate towards AV, which is derived by the percentage that you're seeing next to the donut chart there. So while education, for example, may have some of the lowest CapEx plan and the lowest plan investment in, say, AV, the percentage that was going to AV in those solutions was the highest of all that we saw, 9%. Second to that would be corporate and retail at around 6.5%. This is very consistent. So these are good benchmarks. When you're looking to scope work and understand the opportunities out there, I've seen data that sizes the AV industry by using construction spending. So one benchmark you can use off that is say, well, what percentage of a construction spend would end up towards AV? What we tend to see is between about 3 and 5%. So this is consistent with those percentages, perhaps reflecting in some areas a little bit more of a skew towards an AV bent or a technology bent, such as in the case of education. So this is your baseline. These are the kinds of figures that you can use as you flesh out your opportunity and try to understand what's going on. Another way to understand, of course, is what are the pain points? Despite these large scopes, like in transportation, the $157 billion or $1 million that they plan to invest, what are their pain points? Well, budget across all our markets here. So look at the flow of the graph. Seeing all the lines tend to lead up to budget. We all know this. It's like asking a consumer, what's your key deciding factor? And most will say price. It's where what gets interesting is below that and teasing out what's important to some of the various verticals that we're dealing with. Downtime required for installation. Clearly going to be a key concern for a transportation hub that loses millions per day by being shut down. Retail too, time is money. That's true in a lot of cases. But it starts to get interesting as we look at each one. The providers, we asked the same sort of thing. So we wanted to see, is there any disconnect between what an enterprise decision maker is saying is their pain point and what the providers are also seeing out there. And budget, clearly here too. But interesting, as we learned about this morning, so we learned that 57% of customers do their homework and are armed with knowledge. But that we need to be prepared to challenge them. And what our providers are reflecting back to, that end user knowledge was one of the pain points that they dealt with, because it's about having that conversation to not outright say you're wrong, but introduce new perspectives, challenge assumptions that might have been made about the solutions that they needed, the products they needed, and kind of working through that as part of their conversation. So you see end user knowledge, budget. As well, those that are serving retail kind of got that. The economic conditions, consumer demand, those sorts of things were crucial to consideration. So where the rubber hits the road and how you get access, because as I'm sure many of us are thinking through as we look at data, is, well, what's my opportunity set? Some great figures in terms of total spending and the amount going to AV, but is there an opportunity for me to break in? And so this one looked at whether or not the companies were more open in their bidding process by vertical market. So you can see that corporate in a lot of cases was the most competitive. They went out to many different vendors, got bids. Retail, on the other hand, is an opportunity where they went back to the well. They were more likely to actually go back to existing providers in that space. That's an interesting one for us, even as Avixa, as we look at our own membership among providers. Who are the providers that we tend to get? They serve corporate, they serve higher ed. Where we haven't made as much traction yet is in this retail space. We know there's another potential breed of provider out there that is serving this market a little bit more. It's something that you have to know. So how do you get that knowledge? Well, some of it is certainly market intelligence. Some of it is going to retail panels to learn more about their pain points. Interestingly, as we said, in most cases, when we survey our base, as I noted before, the tried and true, the vertical markets that come up all the time really are corporate. I was interested to see confirmatory again, where those markets that you felt the least confident about your company's ability to serve, the one that got almost no mention, corporate. It's because by and large, the providers that we work with, that is a space that they're comfortable with. 90% saying they already work with that particular vertical market. 5.2 interested. Places like retail, we didn't ask healthcare, I'm sure that would be another one, but retail, a little less, not as much current work, some interest there, but not nearly as much as, say, sports venues and transportation. So good reflection even of what's going on in this room in terms of the places that people are interested in working. It's another way to look at that. So where do you plan to increase your business? Where do you expect growth will come from in terms of vertical markets over the coming year? In every case, we can see our providers are really hoping. The business is good, there's strong demand, and so they're planning to and are expecting that growth will happen. Further supporting this idea of our market as vibrant, as growing, et cetera. Significant increases really expected in corporate, more so than any other. Transportation being the next one. So perhaps some of our providers in our sample are starting to reap that interest level in those large projects that are starting to be planned out inside that vertical market. A ton of information. The slides are available to you to dig deeper, ask questions of it. The reports, we have summaries available on the app that you can email to yourself. Certainly happy to take questions from you too. The question that I would leave you with is this one. As you go into your afternoon, and as you look at even the data that you've already seen, what are the opportunities that you will seize? So we're going to put that poll up. Actually, go ahead, guys. That's fine. Which of the following market opportunities do you feel you learned most about from today's session? This is what you'll take with you as you go. We'd be happy to take some questions, actually, as you go ahead and type in your answers. I think we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to actually invite my fearless leader, Dave, come back up on stage.
All right, Sean. So we do have a couple questions from the audience. Start with a quick short one. Are all the figures global figures that you presented?
Good question. So there's actually two answers to that. We focused our More series out of the gate on just North America. So the latter half where I started talking about the More report, the vertical markets, the investments, all that research, that was North America only. Our IOTA is global data. So there we are sizing markets across the globe with IHS's help. So it depends on the data you're looking at, but yeah, that should give you a rough idea.
Okay, great. Thanks. Another one is related to end users' knowledge. And the question is the provider gap pointing to a lack of our knowledge, a lack of their knowledge, or the inaccuracy of their opinions?
Never the last one. Never the last one. It's a good question, and that's why when you look at data like this, you start to ask those questions. I think I had a note even on that particular slide that teed up. While there's planned investment and there's areas that they may want, they're thinking that they need. As we heard before, they've done their homework, they've researched, they think they really need this kind of solution. Providers are saying, oh, but there's actually a whole bunch more that you might want to consider. So I think it's a little bit of a gap in the conversation too. It's their perspective. I would never say wrong, not wrong perspective, because they're reflecting what their experience has been as decision makers about what they need. Providers are telling us similarly, well, when I've gone to market, here's what I've ended up selling. So it's that gap. It's somewhat skills, but it's also somewhat gap in conversation and saying, well, did you think about? Have you considered, say, an investment in an audio solution to deal with sound quality in transportation, for example?
Great. Here's another one. How can you tie this data to the live event staging services that we provide to corporate and education, for example?
So we'll get a lot more into that with the live events survey, and that actually tees up next year's plan. So the ones that we've done so far, the vertical markets that you saw, retail, corporate, hospitality, transportation, sports venue being the closest to that live event. We're actually planning to do a dedicated report on live events next year, 2019. So stay tuned for more on that. I would say that bears its own research. I think we want to better understand that more temporary pop-up, rental and staging type of opportunity in specific. We do have industry sizing figures around it, but want to dig deeper. So I would say we don't have a good answer for that right now, other than we want to do more research on it.
Okay, great. And would you attribute the decline in retail to consumers buying online through Amazon, et cetera, e-commerce?
So would I
Do you attribute the decline
Yeah.
in retail? Is there a decline in retail?
Thank you. That's what I stuck with. So if we refer back to what Andy was talking about earlier, this has been a really, if you dig deep into the data, it's an interesting one to explore. So we have the privilege, I guess, of living next to one of the most successful malls in the country, Tyson's Corner in Northern Virginia. I was just there this past weekend, and I said to my wife, if anybody thinks that retail is dead, they should probably come to this mall and walk around a little bit. So I think what we're seeing, and there's a lot of research on this about overbuilding in the U.S. Retail space. I think what we're seeing now is a consolidation and reinvestment, and that's where the opportunity is for Pro AV. A good example of this, if you've ever seen a Dyson store, so they built out a whole brand experience in Tyson's Galleria, called the Dyson, of course. Uses video walls, projection mapping, lighting, audio, etc. This is the new store of the future. Destination retail is what we're talking about. So while, yes, there may be some top-line consolidation in terms of brick and mortar retail's takeaway, although even that's a bit debatable, depending on where you look. I'd say the opportunity for us is exceptional experience. Surprising, diversifying retail against that online. We talk a lot about that in our retail report.
Great. And there's a couple questions about your slide on CapEx and the percentages and the numbers that were being represented. Could you, I don't know if you can get back to it quickly, but there were questions about what, clarification requested on what is total CapEx and what was the percentage of AV, meaning what percentage of AV is a percent of? And then there was questions about what the yellow numbers were representing on that slide as well.
Doesn't look like I can go back, but I can speak to it. Okay. So we asked two primary questions. In the coming year, what are your capital expenditure or project plans? How much do you plan to invest?
That's it.
There we go. What do you plan to invest? We gave them some ranges and then, of course, derived from there. But we were curious on average sizes of planned projects within the group that we sampled. Of course, you're always going to have a little bit of the sampling bias, reflecting perhaps larger organizations, enterprises in some cases. So the pink, as I mentioned, that's the average of that planned capital expenditure, a loose kind of interpretation around any sort of planned investment. The yellow is derived from the other question. Of that CapEx plan, what percent are you planning to allocate to AV products and services? So in the case of corporate, the average, roughly speaking, was about 6.5% of that CapEx planned spending was going to go or will be allocated towards AV products and services. That yields that yellow number of an approximate project size for AV investment. Hopefully that clarifies it. I'd be happy to dig deeper if somebody wants to catch me in networking session.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much, Sean.